Many planners have some sort of weekly overview. Where the monthly overview shows you all of the days of the month, the weekly overview zooms in on one specific week. In general, there are two main types of weeklies, vertical and horizontal. An example of the horizontal weekly is the Hobonichi weeks. As you can see, the days of the week are rows stacked on top of each other. In the case of the Hobonichi weeks, all 7 days fit on one page, whereas some other planners have, for example, Monday through Thursday on the left page and Friday through Sunday on the right page. An example of the vertical weekly can be found in the hobonichicousin, which is what I have here in front of me. Here, the days of the weeks are columns instead of rows. Most vertical weeklies have some sort of timeline, in this case running from 5 a.m. to 5 a.m. While the vertical weekly is an integral part of many planners, it might take you some experimenting to find a way of using it that works for you and your style of planning or journaling. In this video, I've got you covered with 20 ideas on how to use your weekly pages. Now, just a note, this is a random weekly spread from June 2021 to be precise that I copied from an old hobonichicousin, so the dates aren't actually relevant at all. Figured I would mention that. And another note before we begin is that different planners and planner brands can have different designs for their weekly pages. Some factors that may vary are the presence or absence of a sidebar, which is the bar here on the left, the length of the timeline, in the Hobonichi that runs from 5 a.m. to 5 a.m., but in some planners that goes from like 8 a.m. until 10 p.m., and whether both days of the weekend get their own column, which the hobonichicousin does, or they are stacked on top of each other, like here in the Wonderland 222. Now, let's dive into it, shall we? The timeline in the hobonichicousin starts at 5 a.m. Personally, I'm rarely awake at that time, so for the first couple of ideas, I've drawn in a horizontal line, in this case at around 8 a.m., to create a row of boxes at the top that is separate from the rest of the days. For our first idea, we have appointments or meetings. By putting these at the top of the day, we make them extra visible, for example, as an extra reminder. The second idea is to use the box at the top for deadlines. This way, you can more easily take the specific deadline into consideration when planning your week. For the third idea, we have reminders. I like putting these up at the top because they often don't have a specific time. For example, birthdays, music or book releases, and deliveries. Our fourth and last idea for the top row is to use it for the focus of the day. Which tasks are your absolute priority today? What needs to be finished by the end of the day? You might also consider creating a list of priorities for the entire week. And in that case, you could also put them in the sidebar. Speaking of the sidebar, let's see what we can use that for. Idea number 5 is to use the sidebar to track things that you are waiting on. For example, a parcel delivery or an email from a colleague in reply to a question you asked earlier. Because these items aren't really things that we can act on, they are easier to forget. However, depending on whether the other party involved delivers on time or not, you might have to take action. For our sixth idea, we have a weekly to-do list. I like to use the weekly overview for planning, but some tasks do not have a specific day on which I need to or want to do them. I could pick a random day, of course, but I prefer listing some tasks in the sidebar and making sure I get around to doing them at some point during the week. So for example, here we have clean the kitchen. I have to do that at some point during the week. Idea number 7 is to break down a bigger project into smaller tasks. A common pitfall when planning your day is to write down a project as though it were a task. Writing a 20-page assignment is much more manageable when you break it down into smaller steps, until each step is an actionable task. You can use the sidebar for a project that you maybe want to get done by the end of the week, and then schedule the separate tasks when you're planning your week. So the eighth idea is to include a habit tracker in the sidebar. Habit trackers can take many shapes or forms, so here are two examples. The first one is a simple table. On the left, we see the days of the week, and at the top, we have 4 habits. Each day, you can check off whether you have or haven't done these 4 things. It is, of course, entirely up to you how many habits you include, which may further influence the most ideal layout for your habit tracker. And the second example I've drawn in is a graph. In this case, a graph that tracks the hours of sleep over the course of the week. Now, let's get into the core part of the weekly spread, which are the individual days. For idea number 9, we have a daily schedule. This schedule is fairly simple. It broadly lists the things I know about my day. In this case, I've opted to not include things such as having dinner in order to make the other items stand out more. If you want to plan in more detail, the next idea is for you. Idea number 10 is to time block your entire day. There are various definitions of scheduling and time blocking, but I understand time blocking as a way to plan more or less every minute of your day. As you can see in this example, I haven't just indicated that I will be working from 9 to 5, but also when my meetings are and on which projects or tasks I want to be working in between. Time blocking can be quite intense, and especially doing so on paper doesn't allow for much flexibility. So for idea number 11, we ignore the timeline entirely, and we write down a good old to-do list. Personally, I like to make smaller batches of tasks that are somewhat related to each other. So for example, these are all related to making a video, and these are all related to studying. Another great way to divide your tasks is to make a section for the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. This is especially helpful if you tend to make to-do lists that are too long. Personally, I find it hard to gauge how many tasks I can get done in a day, but I can give a more accurate estimate of how much I can get done in one morning, for example. Idea number 12 is an anti-to-do list. This isn't a list of things that you shouldn't do, but rather a list of things you did that weren't on your to-do list. I got this idea from my partner, who keeps both a to-do list and an anti-to-do list for work. On days that he didn't manage to get much done from his to-do list, there will usually have been lots of things that came up that were urgent and that needed attention. So of course you could add these items to your to-do list retroactively and check them off, but by keeping these lists separate, you get a better understanding of what is happening. Maybe there are certain patterns, like that one colleague who will always need something done at the last minute on a Friday afternoon. In that case, you could either ask them to stop doing that, or you could set apart some time in case something comes up. Our 13th idea is to use the weekly page for memory keeping. There are many ways in which you can do this, but in this example, I've written down some things from the day that stood out to me. In this case, the timeline isn't completely ignored and the order is still chronological, but everything is a bit more loose. Sometimes lettering in a word takes up a little more space in terms of hours on the timeline than the actual event, but that's okay. If your household consists of more than one person, it might be helpful to keep track of everyone's schedules. So idea number 14 is that of a family or household schedule. Now, I don't have kids, so this is me, my partner, and our 2 cats, who apparently go to school and do musical theater, but it's just an idea video, okay? But here, each family member gets one column, and that way you can easily see who's at home, who's at work, who's at school. If you have something planned for multiple family members, say a movie night, you can section off a certain block of time with a box, like this. For this example, the box goes all the way across, so it's a movie night with the 4 of us. Idea number 15 is to use the weekly pages for a bit of journaling. Granted, the weekly pages don't give you a lot of space for writing, but that can also be a good thing. A blank A5 page can be quite intimidating and overwhelming, so if you don't need a lot of space for writing, the weekly page might just be the right fit. And if you don't like the amount of line breaks the narrow columns require, consider turning your page 90 degrees, so you get longer lines. As we saw before, the Hobonichi cousin has a 24-hour timeline all the way from 5 a.m. to 5 a.m. Now, except for the weekends, I'm rarely awake after midnight, so just like we did with the top row, you can also draw in a horizontal line to create a row of boxes at the bottom of the page. And with that, we unlock 5 more bonus ideas for our weekly spread. Idea number 16 is to use the space at the bottom for a bit of gratitude journaling. What are you grateful for? After a day full of tasks, appointments, and making sure you get as much done as possible, this can be a nice way to reflect on the day. I usually find that no matter how productive or unproductive my day was, the things I'm grateful for are usually not on my to-do list. It's that the sun was shining on my walk to the train station, a phone call with my parents, or finding a new artist that I've been listening to for days on repeat. For idea number 17, we have a wins of the day. What is something you accomplished today that feels like a win? Was it having enough stamina for a longer run than normal? Or was it just surviving work even though you really didn't sleep well? Idea number 18 is that of a media log. I like tracking what I was watching, reading, listening to. You could just write down a title of a book or show, or which episodes you watched, or how many pages you read. I guess this is also a form of memory keeping, something fun to look back on. Idea number 19 is that of a food log or a meal plan, depending on when you fill this in. You can log what you had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or you can use this space to plan your meals for the week, whichever is most useful to you. And the last idea, number 20, is that of a spending log or expense tracker. Here you can write down what do you spend money on and how much. And there you have it, 20 ideas on how to use the weekly pages in your planner. We've seen some ideas for a top and a bottom row, for the sidebar, and for the main part of the spread. This should give you plenty of options to mix and match and create your ideal weekly layout. If your planner has a timeline, just like this Hobonichi cousin, but you feel like it doesn't work for you, try rewriting it. For example, if you only want to plan from 9 to 5, but 2 grid rows per hour isn't enough, consider rewriting it so you have 4 grid rows per hour. And as we've seen with some of the ideas, you can of course ignore the timeline altogether. Some of these ideas overlap with the ideas recorded for the monthly overview. I suppose that's only natural, as there are many ideas that can be implemented in various ways and that can take many shapes depending on the amount of space you're given. So if you need some more ideas, maybe take a look at the video for monthly ideas. And if you have an idea on how to use the vertical weekly that hasn't been mentioned, feel free to share that in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!